Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm discussing the 2011 movie Bridesmaids, written by Annie Mumolo and Kristen Wiig, and directed by Paul Feig. And this movie is not only hilarious, but it captures the importance of female friendships. And of course, we follow the journey of the main character, Annie Walker, played by Kristen Wiig. And we just see the ups and downs of her life, including her love life, where even with the opening scene, we just see her having sex with her boy toy, Ted, played by John Hamm. And she's kind of hinting at maybe she wants a real relationship with him, but he's clearly not interested in that at all. He only cares about the physical relationship with her. We also learn about her failed business, that she had a bakery that went out of business called Cake Baby. We also learn that she works at a jewelry store, but she only works there because her boss is sponsored by her mom in AA and that he's doing her a favor. We also learn about her living arrangement. She lives with this bizarre brother and sister. The sister is played by Rebel Wilson. And it's so funny when she's just introduced in this movie and how she's talking about she got a free tattoo. She lifts up her shirt and it's like this infected tattoo and she's so proud of it. And she's saying how it's a Mexican drinking worm. It's like a Native American symbol for wasted. And then she's telling you she put ice on that, put some frozen peas on it, and then she's just pouring the frozen peas instead of putting the bag on her back. But we do see also that she has a close friendship with Lillian, played by Maya Rudolph. They're in fact best friends from childhood. And they have such natural chemistry because it's clear that Kristen Wiig and Maya Rudolph are friends in real life. They, of course, worked on SNL together. And so you see that friendship between Annie and Lillian. Even when they're doing that scene in the park, they're doing the boot camp, but they're hiding behind the tree because they didn't want to pay for the class. And the boot camp instructor is Terry Crews. He's always great, Terry Crews. But then, of course, the real plot of the story goes into motion when we find out that Lillian is engaged. And she asks Annie to be the maid of honor. And then we meet the other bridesmaids. We have Lillian's cousin Rita, played by Wendy McLondon Covey. And she has 3 boys, so she's being driven crazy by that. And then we have Lillian's work friend, Becca, played by Ellie Kemper, and she is a newlywed. And then it's so funny, she's like, oh, this is my husband, Kevin. Oh, this must be your husband, when she's talking to Annie. And then it's just some unattractive bald guy. And she's like, oh, no, that's not my husband. And he's like, oh, you want to go for a walk? She's like, no, I can't. And then Becca's apologizing, saying, oh, I'm so sorry, let me start over. I'm Becca, this is my husband. You don't have a husband. Way to add salt to the wound there. And then we meet Doug's sister, played by Melissa McCarthy, Megan. This is like her breakout role, Melissa McCarthy. Even though, she's been in other things, of course. She was Suki St. James in Gilmore Girls, which I watched Gilmore Girls after it ended. I watched it for the first time a few years ago, and that's a great show, too. But this is, I think, one of her best roles still to date. She's in a lot of movies, Melissa McCarthy, and she's hilarious. But when we first meet Megan, she's just talking to Annie, saying, I'm on the mend, got pins in my legs, and saying she fell off a cruise ship, and then she's saying how she found a dolphin down in the ocean and that the dolphin was communicating with her, saying the dolphin is going to save her. And she's saying, not with his mouth. I'm assuming telepathically. And then she's like, oh, you must be Annie's fella. And then she's like, no, that's not. And just another guy. And she's like, no. He's like, well, I'm glad he's single because I'm going to climb that like a tree. And then we meet Helen, played by Rose Byrne. And she is Doug's boss, Perry's wife. And she's got this gorgeous gown on. She's so elegant and poised. She seems absolutely perfect with everything she does. And then right off the bat, you kind of see the rivalry, and Annie already starting to feel threatened by her, even when she goes to give the toast. And it's like that back and forth thing with the toasts, their speeches, and she's saying, oh, have a great night, dessert wine is out. And then Annie just keeps one-upping her, and then she just keeps one-upping her back, saying like, oh, you're my best friend, all that stuff. And Annie's saying, well, we've been best friends since childhood. And Helen's saying, well, we're best friends as adults. You're my angel and soulmate. I feel I can communicate with you with simply a look. And then Annie starts singing, and then they both start singing, keep smiling, keep shining, that stuff. So stupid. Just kind of like that passive-aggressive sense where she's... not that she's ill-intentioned, but just that she's already trying to show how close she is with Lillian, supposedly. Even though Annie is the maid of honor. And then after the party, when Annie is swerving her car, making fun of Helen, then she gets pulled over by the cop, Officer Rhodes, played by Chris O'Dowd. And, you know, I personally don't really care for this whole little subplot with the romance between Annie and Officer Nathan Rhodes. It's cute and all, but this isn't a romantic comedy. This, as I said, it's about the friendship between Annie and Lillian, and how Annie's starting to feel inadequate in all areas of her life, and how Helen is this perfect person, and she feels like she can't compete with her for Lillian's attention and just for doing all these things for the wedding. But Lillian wants her to spend some one-on-one time with her to get to know Helen, and so they play tennis. That whole sequence is funny too. And there's a great line when Helen introduces her stepkids. One of the stepkids is played by Matt Bennett. And I just know him. He's been in whatever movies and stuff, of course. But I have seen a couple things. But I just know him most notably from the show Victorious on Nickelodeon. He is Robbie Shapiro, the one with the puppet Rex. But his line is so funny when they're playing tennis, and he just says, I've seen better tennis playing in a tampon commercial. Jeez. And then again with the living situation with Annie, just more tension with her roommates. Then they're talking about how they read her diary, and then Bryn is saying, at first I did not know it was your diary. I thought it was a very sad handwritten book. And then the brother Gil says, you need to maybe put a note on your door saying, do not come into my room, read my diary, and wear my clothes. I mean, my God, talk about no consideration whatsoever for her personal space. Poor Annie. But then all the bridesmaids go out to lunch, and then they have the fitting afterward. And at lunch, Annie mentions that for the bridal shower, it could be French-themed because Lillian loves Paris, has always talked about going to Paris. And Megan has such a funny line in this scene when when she's talking about her brother, saying, he's my brother and I love him, but he's I'm not going to say the words, keeping this clean, but, you know, and he just says, I think we can all agree on that. He's an effing, you know, when she says, if you've seen this movie, I'm sure you have. And then there's that whole part, of course, when they go to the fitting, and then they get food poisoning, and, oh God, they're crapping and throwing up. I know it's supposed to be played for laughs, As I said when I discussed Pitch Perfect, I never cared for vomit jokes whatsoever. I find them just not funny at all, just flat out gross. And even this too, it's like, oh god, oof, you could feel their pain. Like, oh, that's terrible. They all get food poisoning, except for Helen, of course, 'cause she didn't eat the food. But that's brutal. And then jumping ahead a bit, another whole funny sequence is when they're on the plane, when they're saying they're going to go to Vegas for the bachelorette party. And that's a scene where the co-writer Annie Mumolo has a cameo. And doing some research about this movie, I found out that she was actually pregnant during the filming of this. But her role in this is when she's talking to Annie, because Annie's worried about flying. And then she's sitting there nervous herself, and she's saying, I had a dream last night that we went down. Yep, it was terrible. You were in it. Like, oh gosh, you don't want to hear that. And then also what's cute is that Megan is she knows right away that this guy sitting next to her is the air marshal, but he keeps denying it. The air marshal, John. And he's played by her husband in real life, Ben Falcon. And she's just so into him, encouraging him. She's saying, I really appreciate what you do for this country, and I respect the hell out of you. Of course, she has some of the best and funniest lines. She just goes all in. Melissa McCarthy, she's so funny. Oh, gosh. And then, of course, we also have that contrast between Becca, who's this newlywed and hasn't had kids or anything yet, and still getting used to that. Even though she even confesses that she's only been with her husband. And Rita is talking about how she's so exhausted and her kids are wild and out of control. And then, of course, there's that part where they're drunk and Becca trying to encourage her, saying, you're more beautiful than Cinderella. You have a face like sunshine and you smell like pine needles. That. And then poor Annie's drunk after Helen gives her something to calm her down and gives her scotch. See, Helen isn't... She is the antagonist in this movie because she's the one basically one-upping Annie all the time. But she comes across as this nice woman who's just really great at what she does. In this case, organizing things, throwing events, knowing all these people, using her affluence to get them everything. But then when Annie's drunk, because she wanders into first class, they keep telling her to go back to coach. And then so you have to go back to your seat. You have 3 seconds. And she says, you can't get anywhere in 3 seconds. You're setting me up for a loss already. And he's saying, well, that's too bad. You better go. And then she's saying, whatever you say, stove. Stove. What kind of name is that? Are you an appliance? He's like, my name is Steve. Gosh. And then when she freaks out, then they get kicked off the plane. But I like some of the more serious moments here and there, even though, of course, this is a comedy. But then, like, when she's talking to Officer Rhodes later, after this whole debacle with the plane, and she's talking about Lillian, saying, I feel like her life is going off and getting perfect, and mine is just... And she just trails off like hers is a mess. And then after she and Rhodes sleep together, Rhodes is saying, oh, maybe you can get back into baking again. He's trying to just encourage her. He's just a genuinely nice guy, but she's just put off by it. She doesn't want to go back and face that, even though that was her career, what gave her something she was good at, gave her more meaning, other than her kind of wandering around listlessly with no direction, feeling like she's losing Lillian as a friend. And then, of course, when she has that fight with the girl in the jewelry store and she gets fired. And then she gets kicked out of her apartment with the roommates. And they're saying, we like to invite you to no longer live with us anymore. And then she's saying, you have to leave. Oh, that's prickly, like when she touches her leg. So then she moves in with her mom. And then for the bridal shower, since then Lillian basically said this is all too stressful for you and she wants Helen to take over and do everything. So then the bridal shower is at Helen's house. And of course it's this gorgeous mansion. She gets pink lemonade. She rides up on a horse. And then she finds out that Helen will be taking Lillian to Paris. She surprises her. And that's when Annie reaches her breaking point. She has an absolute meltdown. Saying, like, of course this woman went and did this behind my back just because she mentioned that Lillian loves Paris. Like, she's stealing Lillian away from her. She's saying how Lillian has changed, and you would have rolled your eyes at all of this. And she just screams, and she's saying, look at this cookie, and she goes and breaks it. And everyone's just staring at her. She's having this meltdown. Poor Annie, like, her life sucks. She can't take this anymore. All this stuff going on. Feeling like Lillian isn't her best friend anymore, and feeling like she has nothing going on in her life. And then the stepdaughter, you just see her smiling. She's like, oh, awesome, Helen's stepdaughter. Like, enjoying this woman having this meltdown. And then Lillian tells Annie, if you're going to act like this, then don't even bother coming to my wedding. So Annie storms out. And after the whole blow up, Helen just says, I'm proud of you, Lil. Shut up, Helen! Anybody else here have anything they want to share today? And then Megan raises her hand. I took 2 dogs already. They're in the back of my van. I love it. It's just great. Because the party favors are dogs, of course. What else would you get at this elegant, gorgeous bridal party? And then when Annie's driving home, she just looks out and sees Megan driving in her van with all these dogs. Megan, like, looking like, yeah, look at all these dogs she got. And then Annie ends up braking hard for a porcupine in the road, and then someone rear-ends her because she didn't get her taillights fixed. That was the whole thing why Officer Rhodes had stopped her too when she was swerving and saying you have to get your taillights fixed. And then it's like a metaphor when he's saying you should have just gotten them fixed. It's an easy solution. She's saying, well, I didn't do it. She's not facing her problems head on. And then when she's home at her mom's house, then Megan comes along with her many, many dogs. And Annie says, how many of those did you take? I took 9. Yeah, I did slightly overcommit to the whole dog thing. Turns out I'm probably more comfortable with 6. It's a lot of energy to deal with, but you wouldn't know anything about that because you didn't return any of my calls. And then Annie's saying, well, what would I have said? How I have no job, no apartment, love life's a mess, have no friends. It's interesting you have absolutely no friends. Here's a friend standing in front of you trying to talk to you, but you want to have a pity party. And then she's like slapping her saying, I'm your life, fight for your life. And then Annie finally slaps her. And Megan, impressed, saying, nice hit. All right, I'm glad to see you've got a little bit of spark in you. I knew that Annie was in there somewhere. And I love this whole speech from Megan, where she says, I think you're ready to hear a little story about a girl named Megan who didn't have a very good time in high school. I'm referring to myself when I say Megan. It's me, Megan. I know you look at me now and think, boy, she must have breezed through high school. Not the case, Annie. This was not easy going up and down the halls with. They used to try to blow me up. They used to throw firecrackers at my head in high school. Firecrackers. I mean literally, not figuratively. They called me a freak. Do you think I let that stop me? Do you think I went home crying to my mommy, oh, I don't have any friends? I did not. You know what I did? I pulled myself up, I studied hard, I read every book in the library, and now I work for the government and have the highest possible security clearance. Don't repeat that. I cannot protect you. I know where all the nukes are and I know the codes. And then her other great line is when she just says, you're your problem, Annie, and you're also your solution. So then Annie just takes control of her life. She bakes again. She bakes a cute carrot-shaped cake because earlier with Officer Rose, they were eating carrots together, and it says, "I'm sorry." So she apologizes to him, and then she goes to get the taillights fixed. She introduces her mom to the mechanic, and they seem to hit it off, which is cute. And then when she drives back, though, she sees that the cake was still out there. He didn't bring it in, and the raccoons are eating it because he's angry with her. She hurt his feelings. And then it's the day of the wedding, and Annie doesn't seem like she's going to go. But then Helen comes there saying that Lillian is missing. And then this is another great scene, too, where they have that much-needed confrontation, and things finally get real with Helen. Not that she's fake, but she's just always so on. She's always so perfect and polite and elegant and charming. But then she just starts getting upset and apologizing to Annie. And Annie's saying, "Well, I don't want to talk to you." And then Helen says, "Perry," as in her husband, "never wants to talk to me either. He travels a lot, like all year. I'm basically just by myself." And then she's saying how, "I really liked the original dress you picked at the bridal store. I thought it was beautiful. You have lovely taste." She's saying, "Well, that's too late for that now." And then Helen confesses, "I think people only ask me to do their weddings because I'm good at organizing parties." And then she's just crying at this point, and asks Annie why she's smiling, and Annie says, "This is the first time I've seen you look ugly. It makes me kind of happy." Like she's ugly crying. She finally sees her vulnerable with her walls down, crying, being a real human being, not just this perfect person. And she's saying, "No, I don't look ugly." And she's saying basically that she feels alone as she has no real female friends. So it's a moment that humanizes Helen. And so they're able to kind of get over their differences. And then they find out that Lillian is just back at her apartment, and then Lillian's freaking out because she's saying how this chapter of her life is over. She's never going to be back in this apartment again. The wedding is overwhelming her. And Annie assures her that Doug loves her and that she loves her. And they hug and they make up. And then she's saying, well, she's trying her dress. And it's this poofy monstrosity of a dress. If I may steal a line from Sheldon Cooper in Big Bang Theory, if you've ever watched that show, if you've seen Amy Farrah Fowler's dress, except Sheldon thinks she's beautiful, which is cute. I'll get to Big Bang Theory, don't worry about that. But anyway, I digress. When he says, you look like a pile of swans, this is how she looks. But then the wedding, of course, ends up absolutely beautiful and perfect. And then the last surprise Helen has for Lillian is that their favorite band, Wilson Phillips, comes to sing her favorite song, Hold On, and I almost said Kristen Wiig, and Annie says, "Really?" And she's saying, "It's the last one, I promise." That song, Hold On, is great, has a great message, too. If you've seen this movie, obviously you know it. But if you haven't heard that song, just listen to it. It's a great song. And one of my favorite lyrics in that is just, "No one can change your life except for you." Important thing to remember. And then just one last absolutely hilarious thing in the movie when, after Lillian and Doug leave for their honeymoon, and then you just see Megan laughing, and Annie says, "What's so funny?" And Megan says, "I put a loaded gun in Dougie's carry-on. TSA is gonna rip his ass apart." Oh my gosh. That's absolutely insane. Jeez. But then Helen and Annie have a nice moment where they're saying, "It was nice meeting you." And she says, "It was really nice meeting you too, Helen." And then she says, "Maybe sometime the three of us could go to Rock and Sushi together." So, alluding to the fact that maybe they will have a true friendship after all this craziness. And they hug. So it's very sweet. And then Annie reunites with Officer Rhodes. And that's cute too. So he accepts her apology. So it's just a nice win for Annie that she's finally turning her life around. She has a nice guy. She's got her best friend back. She made a new friend in Helen. It's all very sweet. And of course, that scene at the very end, the after credits scene, or mid-credits scene, whatever you call it, when it's just Air Marshal John and Megan, and they're filming themselves in bed, and she's saying, "All right, it's Air Marshal John's and I first sexual encounter." She's got the giant sub sandwich. She's saying, "You hungry bear, you see how my flap opens?" Like eating the sandwich. "You want to bite out of the sandwich? It's meats and cheeses." So just such a hilarious movie, but with some nice moments that make it relatable. And all the craziness of planning a wedding. But it's fun too, of course, being at a bridal party and going to a bridal shower, all that stuff. Bachelorette party. Even though they didn't have their bachelorette party, it didn't quite go as well. But it all, of course, worked out, and she had a lovely wedding. And I'm glad this movie didn't have a sequel. I mean, it just... Maybe if they had done a sequel, it could have been maybe Annie's wedding, but it just would have been repeating stories. Kind of like how The Hangover... That's a great movie. It's hilarious. But Hangover 2, it's just... the same story beats, just a different location. And then Hangover Part 3 was just... It was okay, but... I digress. This movie, though, is great. Just fun and funny and lighthearted and real and sweet. And with that, that's going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. You can follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Storytelling Saga, as well as on Twitter at Storytell Saga. You can also send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by leaving me a message in the contact section of storytellingsaga.com or by sending me an email at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. And I've been getting a couple emails, so I'm really excited about that. So please don't hesitate to write in. I'd love to hear from you. Like I said, whether you've got a question for me, any comments at all, whether you have a writing prompt, I'd love it. So please do write in. Next week, I'm ready. My leg! Is mayonnaise an instrument? Chocolate! I'm ugly and I'm proud. East? I thought you said weast. I've soiled the good Krusty Krab name. Soiled it. Soiled it. Soiled it. Soiled it. Oh, please. I have no soul. Are you Squidward? That's okay. Take your time. You don't need a license to drive a sandwich. In honor of its 20th anniversary, I will be discussing SpongeBob SquarePants. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.